overall in the past couple of years, I think there's been a challenge to advertisers and marketers when it comes to the CTV space. And it really comes down to the opaque nature of the channel itself. The three areas that I've seen have been kind of problematic to an extent is targeting options, so the availability of that. A lot of the advertisers and planners and buyers that I've spoken to the past year have signaled to me that there's a lack of transparency across the board. It's pretty well known. That categorical genre level based of targeting doesn't really lend itself to many options. So I think the challenge and the onus is on partners such as ourselves, and how do we find a path forward? How do we provide more solutions, more innovation, working hand in hand with publishers in developing ways that we can open up that targeting option. And then I think it lends itself into areas of insight where there is a complete lack of insight on the ingoing kind of aspect of the planning process, I feel, at times. I think when you think about insights, there's always that post-campaign insight, which is what did I learn after my campaign delivered, versus what do I know going into it. So that's another area that finding a challenge for brand advertisers. We're hyper-focused on how do we begin to bridge the gap between consumption in the CTV landscape as well as consumption happening on the open web in order to provide that level of insight that powers the targeting, that powers the conversation forward. So those are some of the two of the areas I think where we're seeing a problem or a challenge in how we're trying to move things forward. And then the last piece, and it's kind of a tale as old as time, I think, is creative, ultimately. We've learned through the course of great conversations at the senior level and then further down the hierarchy there across agencies and brands. There's this desire to be more adaptable, to be more precise or personal when it comes to messaging, whether you're in the CTV space. And so how do we begin to think about creative in a more targeted approach? And how do we use these unique signals, these unique insights to power that personalization in that medium? So those are some of the things I think we're prioritizing. We have begun to prioritize over the past 2 years, and I'm excited to see it evolve very much.
How do you see Seedtag's technology informing the advertising strategy?
Yeah, I think that technology and everything we do, our AI is very much at the core of everything that we're offering holistically as a platform. So the first step is, our AI, we affectionately call her Liz. She's very much meant to bridge a lot of the things I just mentioned, where the ingoing insight, how do we help brands figure out my audience targeting strategy in a cookieless world? And now when we develop that audience approach, how can we have that then lend itself to creative development? How do we have that educate the way that we distribute this messaging? And then coming out of that, to bring it full circle when given the opportunity, how can we have that further glean insights for omnichannel strategy, just as I mentioned earlier? So our technology is very much founded in going beyond just your standard data point and really focused on adding a bit more value to the overarching holistic approach that brands take to their media.
How is contextual AI solve for delivering new signals?
I don't know if it's so much about new signals. I think it's more about the application of the signals that are readily accessible to us. I think one of the things that we've prided ourselves on over the past couple of years is the development of more of this network level analysis or approach to contextual, where the predominant way of thinking of it was very much founded in a keyword or phrase, and that page level comprehension, that's certainly a great starting point. Where we've evolved and where we're looking to take things in terms of newer data signals is that network level analysis. And what we're doing there is we're identifying trends as they're happening in real time. How do we not just identify them, but then adapt creative messaging to them? How do we make it applicable for a brand to target? How do we stay away from trends and content that we're trying to avoid? So having this larger scalable network view of a mass amount of content also better informs our models and allows us for quicker learning, allows us for the ability to be more flexible and nimble as things come down. And that deeper machination of the models is super important to how we develop for the long term when it comes to innovation as we progress into things like connected TV, things like that.
Give me an example of how that works.
Yeah, I think a great example last year, using this holistic approach, we were working with a CPG brand where, you know, for them, they were very much set in their ways of thinking about contextual as more of an endemic channel for them, where it was, I know my audience, I know these swim lanes where they're engaged with content, what more can we do there? And so the onus was on us after the briefing and after constant touch points with the client to better understand where is there kind of this gray space, this available incremental opportunity based on like-minded interests that are being adapted by this audience in the interest world. How do we find it? How do we then message to it? And then how do we prove its efficacy or the performance of it? And I think we were able to do so, and I'm talking a little vague with this client because I'm not trying to give away too much of the brand itself. But we did see through that process that we learned something new about their audience. We learned that there was a whole subcontext to where they were exploring a nuance of a product that this brand had available to, that they were putting to market. So it allowed us to then speak more eloquently to that audience and drive better brand lift, better purchase intent. So that was a great, I guess, use case of Seedtag, not just as an activation point, but as a holistic partner. And since then, we've been exploring other ways that we can adapt a similar model to some of their other brands. So it's been pretty fortuitous.
With that, tell me a little bit about where you see contextual AI heading.
Yeah, you know, I think the things that excite me about our ecosystem right now, you know, we talk about contextual, first off, hasn't really gone away. It never went away, right? I think it's having a great renaissance right now, and what excites me about it is the level of innovation that's happening from the ground up, not just at Seedtag, but just across the marketplace. So the more partners in this space that start adapting a new approach to contextual, the more sophisticated it becomes, the better it actually makes our platform too, because it pushes our innovation forward. So I'm excited for the trend of the adoption of contextual AI across the board. I think that's super exciting. In the connected TV space, I am excited, going back to what I mentioned earlier, is a bit more of that transparency and a bit more of how do we begin to bridge the gap between what are people consuming on a streaming level and how is that impacting, or how is open web consumption powering both of that? How do we bridge that? How do we bring that together while also still being privacy first and cookieless? And I think we've made amazing inroads there with our own contextual TV product. And then lastly, what really excites me is just an overarching re-education, I think, of the industry itself. I think this preconceived way that we've addressed audiences in the past with the notion of a demographic profiling, or, you know, focused on a behavioral habit we saw like a week ago. It's always kind of had its faults. I think the conversations that we're having now with brands is very much about inclusivity and thinking about audiences and consumers less as this data point or data point, and more about what are the interests happening in the moment. How do we better align with that? How do we capture that? So I think the more that we have that conversation, there's some stress pains there because we're kind of stuck in our ways with a lot of the ways that we've done things in the past, but the lanes are opening up, and it's really exciting to see a lot of those conversations ferment.